Hit the like button. We're getting down to the last bit.
Cassette 11, side 2.
Lamont leaned back against the pillows and rubbed his eyes. You want me to be your precious little baby girl, but sooner or later the baby has to grow up. I know, he said. When we were in St. Bart's, you pointed out that woman on the beach and said, she's too old and has had too many kids to be wearing that bikini. Do you know how awful you sound when you say shit like that? And then it turned out to be someone you knew, and you went right over to her and acted like her best friend. He sat, brooding. What happens when I'm over 30 and I've had kids? You gonna talk about me like that? Stiffly, no. Or maybe you're not planning on being with me when I'm 30. Maybe you'll get rid of me and find another 20-year-old who's willing to listen to everything you say. But when I get married, I plan on staying married. Do you? Feeling wrongfully accused and missing the sweet girl he'd wanted to marry without a prenuptial, he mumbled, What's happened to you? How much money do I have? She said. What? Lamont said, thinking that every time he was sure this conversation had hit rock bottom, it somehow took another step down. How much money do I have? She repeated. Every time I ask you for an accounting of my finances, you just tell me you're handling it and brush me off. With all these deals you're making for me, am I still broke? You're not broke, Lamont offered vaguely. Well, let me see the paperwork, she said. You got me out here working like a slave. I think at the very least I should know how much money I have. Why? Lamont snapped. Are you going to chip in for our $1 million wedding? Are you going to contribute to our daily expenses? No, he said before she had a chance to answer. You're not. I take care of everything, so you have nothing to worry about. No, I wouldn't contribute to this wedding because you're the one who wants it to be a circus. I would have run away with you any day or night and gotten married like Vanessa and Alonzo did. This wedding is not about us, Lamont. It's about everything but us. Fuck in style. Fuck in style? What was this blasphemy he heard her speaking? They sat in silence for a while, at an impasse. Then Mimi got up and put on some clothes. Casual clothes. What are you doing? Lamont said. We have to get dressed for the rehearsal dinner. Are we going? She said, tying her hair back. Of course we're going, he said. Lamont, maybe... she said, then trailed off, coming to the full realization that Lamont was a man who'd always lived his life a certain way, and he probably was not going to change. Not even for her. He grabbed her hand. I forgive you the Gemini thing, he said. There's nothing to forgive, she said. Okay, I was going to do something with Olga, he said, but it was only that one time. She wasn't going to back out of this on him. This wedding was going to happen. It had to. What would they tell all the guests? What would they tell Reverend Jackson? And I know nothing happened with Gemini. I believe you. She gave him a long, appraising stare, and suddenly all her regrets and conflicting emotions evaporated. Darryl had always said, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. And he was right. But I don't believe you, she said. I don't want to marry you, Lamont. I'm sorry. Lamont stood there, stunned, as she brushed past him and walked out of the bedroom. Listen to me, he said after a moment. You're talking crazy. But he realized she was gone, and he was talking to himself. He came out of the bedroom and saw Mimi slipping on her sneakers by the front door. Where are you going? Lamont yelled, hurrying down the stairs. Listen to me. Come back here. But she didn't listen to him. She scooped up Beazle, opened the door, and didn't look back. Chapter 56. Life After Death. Lena's sister, Alexandra, arrived at the Grand Hotel du Cap Ferrat in the south of France in the early afternoon. After settling into her room, she found Mimi and Lena lounging poolside. "Hello, girls," she said. "Bonjour." Mimi sat up on her chaise to give Lena's sister a kiss and a hug. "How was your flight?" "Fine, thank you," Alex said. She was still fully dressed and lugging a large tote bag that bore her initials. "Hi," Lena said obligingly as she slathered Bain de Soleil tanning oil on her legs. "It's great to see you too," Alex replied, "and not in handcuffs," she added with a snort of disgust. Lena rolled her eyes underneath her shades. "I brought all the papers and magazines you requested," Alex continued bitterly, dropping the heavy bag with a thud on the floor near Lena's chair. "No need to thank me." "Thanks, Alex," Mimi said genuinely, reaching for the bag. "Did you see Daddy yet?" Lena asked. "No," Alex said. "Where is he?" "I don't know," Lena said. "But he was waiting for you to get here. You should go find him." Alex looked like she wanted to rest in the sun for a while, so Lena added, "Right now." As soon as Alex left, Lena grabbed a few of the newspapers and magazines that Mimi had spread all over the bottom half of her lounge chair. "Oh, God, I need a cigarette for this," Lena said, slipping one out of her pack and lighting up. The day that Mimi walked out on Lamont, she jumped into a cab downstairs. The driver said, "Where to?" and she had no idea. Then she gave him Lena's address. It was the only place Lamont wouldn't think to look. It was the only place she'd feel safe. When Mimi arrived, Henrietta, the housekeeper, was there, and she said Lena had gone to the police station with Mr. Whitaker. Henrietta explained that she had slept at the apartment one night the week before, because my corns was killing me. I couldn't make it to the subway. And she had been woken up by what she thought was a burglar breaking in, but it turned out to be Lena and that rapper boyfriend of hers. "I overheard them talking about dumping a gun and getting their stories straight," Henrietta said, "talking all kinds of foolishness. If Lena had been my girl, I would have knocked some sense into her fast ass a long time ago." And so, even though her corns were aching, Henrietta had surreptitiously followed them down to the incinerator room, and she had fished the gun out of some trash bag after they'd gone. Then she called Mr. Whitaker in L.A. and told him there was big trouble. By the time Marlon arrived in New York and confronted Lena, she'd learned that Billy had been killed. It took her 2 minutes and 12 seconds to flip on Daryl. Marlon got her a criminal attorney, and they went to the police with her full story. The police confirmed that Daryl's gun had fired the shot that killed Billy. When Lena returned to the apartment, she and Mimi had a tearful reunion. Mimi told her she'd left Lamont, and she didn't know what to do, where to go. So she stayed with Lena that night, and they talked all night about whether she was doing the right thing. Lena made the cover of the Tribune the next day, and the story reported that the cops were looking for DeMack, who was now on the run. The story of Mimi and Lamont's broken engagement had not hit the streets yet, but Marlon saw the maelstrom beginning to gather around both girls. Since Mimi said she was sure she wasn't going through with the wedding, Marlon decided they both needed to get out of town until all the press blew over. They were all on the night flight to Paris. "This is horrible," Mimi said, holding up the copy of Us Weekly Alex had bought. The headline read, "Shattered Fairy Tale." "This is worse," Lena said, holding up yesterday's Tribune. Daryl's picture was on the cover, under the headline, "DeMack, It Was an Accident." They'd already seen some of the news about Mimi's canceled wedding and Daryl's arrest on CNN. And they had called Jordan and gotten some inside scoop on what was happening from her. But Alex was given the task of bringing over all the past week's press coverage so they could see it for themselves. Lena leaned over, and they gaped at the Us Weekly cover. "They always gotta run the picture torn down the middle shot," she said, shaking her head at the picture of Mimi and Lamont in happier times. "You look good there, though. When was that?" "Ugh, I don't remember," Mimi said, opening to the story. Sources say Jackson called off the $1 million nuptials after learning that the singer had a fling with Gemini, the super producer behind such hits as... She stopped reading and looked at the picture of Gemini at the top of the page. "That's a damn shame," Lena said. "What did Gemini ever do to anybody?" "And he's so private," Mimi moaned. "He's going to hate me for putting him in the middle of this." "He'll be annoyed," Lena admitted, "but he won't hate you. You should definitely call him now to smooth things over. Or just make a statement saying that it's not true." "Make a statement through who?" Mimi said, still scanning the piece. "Allie C. is Lamont's publicist, and I can't use her anymore." "Yeah, well, you need to find someone new," Lena said, checking out the Tribune story on her involvement in Daryl's arrest. "My dad is your lawyer now. He'll find you someone else. He'll take care of everything." "And wait, listen to this. Lamont is devastated by this betrayal," says a source close to Jackson. Mimi closed the magazine. "I really want to know who these sources are." "I can tell you," Lena said. "Lamont and Allie C." "You think so? Please, Mimi? You've been in the game long enough now to know how it works," Lena said, picking up Us Weekly to skim the article for herself. "And was he so devastated that he had to go on your honeymoon with Kendra?" Jordan had told them that. "I know, I can't believe that," Mimi said, welling up. Over the past week, she'd been prone to spontaneous bursts of tears. Lena was ready with the tissue. The tears had become such a regular occurrence. She whipped one out and handed it to Mimi while continuing to read the article. "You dumped him," Lena said, all of a sudden sounding like the sensible one. "I know," Mimi said, sniffling. "But he goes away with Kendra a week later. I mean, he's over me already?" "Good that you didn't marry him then, if that's the kind of asshole he is," Lena said. Marlon appeared and pulled up a chair. He noticed Mimi was crying again and did not comment. He'd done more parenting in the past week for Lena and Mimi than he'd done in his lifetime. He ran his eyes over the screaming tabloid headlines and sighed. He was thinking of taking a vacation after this vacation. "So, Mimi, I spoke to Irv Green," he said, leaning back under the umbrella of a nearby table for some shade. "And he wants to sign you as the first artist on his new label." "He does?" Mimi and Lena said in unison. "Yes," Marlon said. "I told him you didn't like the material you had already recorded for the second record. You had some other ideas. He wants to talk to you when we get back. Maybe you'll have to start over, but he's willing to hear what you have to say. How does that sound?" "It sounds great," Mimi said hesitantly. It made her suspicious that she wasn't going to have to fight with anyone. So far, everything had been a tug of war. How could anything be this simple? But what about Lamont? He's just going to let me out of my contract? "Well, Irv is buying out the contract," Marlon said carefully, because he didn't want to trigger more tears. "And Lamont is fine with that." "Lamont is fine with that?" Mimi said, angry, not weepy. "He'll let me go just like that?" Marlon cleared his throat. "You let him go," Marlon noted. "Am I correct?" Lena had another Kleenex ready, just in case. Mimi nodded. "Yes," she said quietly. "You know how he is," Lena said. "When something is over, it's over." "This is the best situation for everyone," Marlon said. Yeah, Lena said, wholeheartedly agreeing with her father for the first time in a decade. You'll see. The pool waiter came by and asked if they needed anything. Banana daiquiri, Lena said. As Marlon picked up one of the papers, she added, a virgin banana daiquiri. Same for me, Mimi said. I'll take one too, Marlon said, skimming the story about Lena's former boyfriend, who had accidentally shot and killed this poor 13-year-old boy. But I want alcohol in mine, and please make it a double. Lena leaned over to grab Star magazine, and his eyes fixed on the small of her back. Marlena, is that a tattoo? Oh my goodness, he moaned, squinting hard. What does it say? C-R-A. Chapter 57. I used to love H.E.R. With Lamont in the back seat, Carlos drove through a pair of wrought iron gates and eased the new Range Rover up the long, tree-lined driveway. The 20,000-square-foot castle in the leafy New York suburb of Bedford was a home befitting Lamont's new status as the chairman of Augusta Music. He'd recently purchased it after receiving $95 million for the sale of Triple Large Entertainment. The TLE office was closed down. All of the TLE artists, except Mimi, were re-signed directly to Augusta's Black Music Division, and Lamont's first official act as chairman was to fire hundreds of Augusta employees. Carlos parked by the side entrance. Before heading inside, Lamont grabbed the envelope that had arrived at his office this afternoon. He walked through the kitchen, where his personal chef was preparing dinner, and dashed upstairs to the master bedroom suite, passing the butler and one of the 3 full-time maids on the way, speaking to no one. Hi, honey, Kendra chirped as soon as he set foot in the bedroom. Hey. He kissed her on the cheek and pulled his tie loose. Kendra could be smothering, especially now that they were living together, but she had proved her loyalty. When they'd gone to Hawaii after the canceled wedding, he'd chewed her ear off about what a disloyal bitch Mimi had been. Kendra had never complained. On the last day of the trip, he had apologized for going on endlessly about it, and for all the times he had hurt her in the past. He had told her that he had never appreciated her the way he should have, and sworn that was going to change. Her eyes had lit up, and she had smiled bigger than he'd ever seen. How was your day, babykins? Kendra inquired as Lamont undressed. Wonderful, he said. Busy. And yours? Very busy. I went to the gym and... Kendra went into details about her leisurely day, and Lamont tuned her out. It had become their nightly routine. Kendra had given up on her acting career. Being Lamont's live-in girlfriend was a full-time job. Days were spent beautifying herself, keeping Mama company, and managing the large staff required to ensure things at the mansion ran smoothly. Nights were spent attending industry functions with Lamont and satisfying him sexually, sometimes with the help of 1 or 2 of her beautiful, disease-free friends. Great, Lamont said curtly, which was a signal to her that she should shut up. He looked at the envelope he had brought home from the office. It contained a copy of Mimi's new CD, which was coming out soon on Irv's label, Green Music. He was anxious to listen to it, but he needed some privacy. Olga is waiting for you down in the spa room, Kendra said, and handed him his silk sulka robe. Lamont headed downstairs, smiling. He'd forgotten Olga would be here today. Kendra had recently surprised him by hiring Olga back, even though Kendra had always known about the happy endings. And that was why Kendra was the best girlfriend in the world. While Olga needed his back, Lamont got a chance to listen to Mimi's new album. The first song was called Listen to Me, and it sounded pretty good. The second, On the Inside, was even better. It was just his kind of music. The third song was called Nothing is Something, and he didn't care for the lyrics. After the fourth song, Do As I Say, he felt he'd heard enough. On the floor, he noticed a slip of paper that had fallen out of the envelope. It was a note from Irv, and he squinted to see the words scribbled on it. Business, never personal, it read. He had Olga change the disc. He wished Mimi well, but would this record sell almost 2 million copies as his had done? Probably not. As New Age music filled the room, he tried to put Mimi out of his mind for good. Turn over, Olga said, and he did. Chapter 58. Ladies First. As the nominees for Album of the Year were announced, Mimi squeezed Jem's hand. When they got to her name, Jem squeezed back. Jem had been her sole producer and co-songwriter on her sophomore album, Listen to Me. She'd spent 6 months at the Funk Shack recording songs with him, and in that time, a romance had blossomed. She was living in L.A. now, and he was still in Georgia, but somehow, between her hectic schedule and the distance between them, they had been able to make the relationship work. She had been up for 3 Grammy Awards, and already she'd lost 2. So when the envelope for Album of the Year was opened and a name was called, Mimi began to clap and smile as she had done for every other award. But then, Jem was looking at her. He was smiling. Everyone was looking at her. Everyone was smiling. She saw Irv jump up in the front row, clapping very hard with his hands almost over his head. Jem pulled her to her feet, hugged her, and said, "Go!" He stepped out of the row so she could get to the aisle. And only then did she realize they were clapping for her. She managed to walk up to the stage, hugging Irv on the way up, but she couldn't hear anything. It sounded like waves crashing against rocks. All she could see was a white light. It really did feel like going to heaven. Afterward, she couldn't remember what she had said, but she knew she'd at least managed to thank Jem and Irv. Backstage, Deb, the publicist for Green Music, was waiting. She ushered Mimi through a ton of interviews, and Mimi couldn't remember a single thing she had said in those either. By the time she hooked up with Jem again to go to Irv's annual Grammy after-party, it felt like 2 weeks had passed. Though Mimi was physically and emotionally exhausted, she worked the room with Irv, because this was his moment to shine as much as hers. He'd given her free rein to do what she wanted on the album, and his team had done a stellar job in helping her transition her image from ghetto fab hip-hop princess to alternative soul singer-songwriter. He was so happy, he looked like he was floating around the room. "I guess old Irv still got it," he crowed, with his arm around Mimi's shoulders. It seemed like the photographer's flashbulbs would never stop. When Lamont showed up, Irv went over to speak to him, and Mimi went back to her table with Jem. She hadn't seen or spoken to Lamont since the day she'd run out of his apartment, and this was not the place for that to happen the first time. As far as she was concerned, it didn't need to happen at all. But as she left, she stopped in the ladies' room, and as she came out, she ran right into Lamont, who was heading into the men's room. "Hey," he said warmly. He pecked her on the cheek as if she were a friend he hadn't seen in a while, not his former fiancée who'd walked out on him 2 days before their $1 million wedding. "Hello," she said, standing awkwardly in the dark corner of the restaurant. "Congratulations," Lamont said. "You deserve it. I thought you should have gotten Best Song, too." "Thank you." "Hopefully by your 3rd joint you'll have somebody new to write about," he said, making a playful jibe about her autobiographical lyrics. She laughed, and just then a photographer popped around the corner, and yet another flashbulb exploded before she and Lamont both hurried away in separate directions. That single picture of them together earned the lucky photographer $150,000. It ran on the party pages of Vibe, Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, Us Weekly, People, and New York Magazine. Mimi looked stunning, her long brown curls hanging loose, her shoulders bare in her strapless Zac Posen dress, her makeup flawless, an inviting half-smile on her face. Lamont, however, got caught out there. He was squinting at her, his mostly obscured face in profile, and the unflattering angle gave the whole world a perfect view of his triple, large chin.
Hit the like button. Hit the like button.
Epilogue.
It has been great.
Outro.
Thank you all for...
Daryl went to jail for aggravated manslaughter after admitting that he'd accidentally shot Billy. Despite all his arrests for gun possession, he had never fired a gun in his life until that night. He is currently holding daily rap seminars at Sing Sing Correctional Facility and planning to release a hip-hop/gospel album called Praisin' upon his release. But he will have to find a new record label because Hits Inc., despite its name and hardcore reputation, dropped him following his conviction. Lamont, making hits at Augusta and still living with Kendra with no plans to marry, finally got his chance to be in Vanity Fair. They called him to get secondary quotes for their expose on Daryl's meteoric rise and fall. Vanessa divorced Alonzo. She got hefty alimony payments. He got custody of Pedro. And moved to L.A., where she hooked up with Margot Prescott, an outspoken, openly gay, middle-aged but well-preserved white actress who was starring in her own reality television show. With filming of the second season of the cult hit just beginning, Vanessa is determined to get a lot of airtime. Imani had always harbored an obsessive crush on her boss, but knew she didn't stand a chance with him since she wasn't A, a model, B, a light-skinned black girl with long hair and longer legs who looked like a model, or C, white. But then she got the next best thing, his brother. She consoled Alonzo after Vanessa abruptly dumped him, and they started dating. And she realized this was much better than being with Lamont, because Alonzo was gorgeous and sweet and faithful. Mama developed a line of very real-looking wigs and add-on hair pieces, and hawked Mama Jack's custom hair on QVC. When Lamont was informed that Black Enterprise was planning to do a one-page story on his mother, he shook them down for 2. Mama, who hadn't been known to date in years, fell madly in love with a widower whom she met through her church. Lamont didn't trust the guy. At Mama's birthday dinner, he pulled the 69-year-old mild-mannered retired pediatrician aside and told him to watch his back. Jordan, now editor-in-chief of Sister Girl, indefinitely put off her wedding to Nate after reading a feminist manifesto called Here Comes the Bride that convinced her that marriage was an antiquated institution that enslaved women. But she agreed to let Nate impregnate her because she didn't want to become one of those 40-year-old career women who found out too late that their eggs were all dried up or defective. Lena relocated to L.A. and gave up hard partying to focus on her career. Marlon gave her some startup capital and found additional investors for her business venture, a line of teas and athletic apparel called Wit. Lena's sister, Alexandra, helped with the business plan, and Marislasis Gonzalez was named design director. First year's sales projections are $2 million.
Hit the like button.
Mustafa followed Vanessa to L.A. and lived in Margot Prescott's guest bungalow, Cato Kalin style. He is a consultant for Lena's clothing line. Lamont signed Emma White to Augusta, saying she would be the next Faith Hill. Except her voice didn't even come close. Though completely devoid of musical talent, everyone at the label loved Emma because she hustled like a pro doing promotional appearances, she came ready-made with corporate affiliations, and she looked amazing in her videos. Witchy, now the senior vice president of black music at Augusta, got engaged to Teresa Dearborn, the T in PYT. Though the group was hugely successful, his family said they'd never heard of her and refused to meet their future daughter-in-law, who they privately referred to as the colored girl. Then Teresa dumped him for cheating on her with none other than Emma White. The Mann family was overjoyed when Witchy disentangled himself from sweet, talented, clean-living Teresa and moved in with Emma, a vapid former junkie who did not even have her GED. Allie C. married a nice Jewish dentist from Great Neck, whose last name happened to be Kornbluth, so she could continue to go by the nickname Allie C. Someone came out on the Wendy Williams show. Lamont was furious, but once he saw a spike in sales, he pimped some out to the media, touting him as hip-hop's first homo thug. Some became a gay icon and was named one of People's 50 Most Beautiful. Lamont was named Man of the Year by GLAAD, the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation. Grimy converted to Islam, as Beautiful had been encouraging him to do for years. Brother X, as he now calls himself, shuns drugs, cigarettes, alcohol, and pork. And he does not use cuss words in his rhymes, a decision Lamont is trying to get him to reconsider. Beautiful keeps herself covered at all times. Don Gambino and Envy became the proud, unmarried parents of a baby girl. Their daughter has bright blue eyes, white blonde hair, and skin paler than Casper the Friendly Ghost. Ebony Jones is her name. Superfat E and his wife, Renee, also had a visit from the stork. Triplets, thanks to the fertility drugs. Fat E gained 60 pounds in sympathy weight during the pregnancy. But the happy couple worked out together afterward, and he has lost almost 100. Floss's unimaginatively titled fourth album, Flossin', tanked. But Eugene was making enough in film, $6 million per, that he didn't sweat it. He and his sexy co-star, Lisa Richards, are currently Hollywood's black it couple. Ridiculous was diagnosed with dyslexia and saw a therapist who helped him manage his disability. Lamont promptly got him a deal with Scholastic to put out a line of educational rap CDs. Dickey is currently on a world tour, promoting literacy and his first educational rap-along CD, Ridiculous Rhyming, accompanied by a band of groupies known as Da Silly Hoes. A newcomer to Augusta music, NASDAQ finally has an album, Bull Market, scheduled for release next year. Daryl's icejacking is a secret he and Alonzo swore to keep to themselves. Crazy G's debut album, Mayhem, fizzled. He is living in Miami with his round-the-way girl, the one he'd always kept on the side while he ran through every hip-hop and R&B chick in the industry. Bradley Brown III left Anne Priss-Ann Brown for his longtime mistress, who dressed like a stripper and knew how to drop it like it was hot. Anne got half and the kids. She is seeing a therapist 4 times a week. Rayshawn Atkins broke his leg in a car accident and had to sit out an entire NBA season. He spends all his free time in the lab working on his debut rap CD. Lamont will not take his calls. Jerry Morelli ran out on Angela after stealing the car Mimi had bought her. Angela is now the president of Mimi's fan club and happily spends her weekends mailing off Mimi's signed headshots to her daughter's devoted fans. Keisha is a stay-at-home mother to her 2 kids in Toledo, and she still believes that one day her fiancé is going to quit dealing drugs of his own volition. Toya moved to Los Angeles, where she opened her own hair salon, which Mimi financed. Mimi and Lena threw her a star-studded opening party, and it does a booming business. Mimi is happy with her personal life. Her long-distance romance with Jem continues to bloom, and her career has never been better. The Grammy win bolstered sales of Listen to Me. It did quadruple large numbers. 6 million sold, and counting. Bling!
The end. You've been listening to Bling by Erica Kennedy, narrated by Kevin R. Free, and directed by Julie Becoyan. If you've enjoyed this book and this performance, Griot Audio recommends My Fine Lady by Yolanda Joe, narrated by Susan Spain. Like a modern-day Eliza Doolittle, Imani finds herself caught up in a musical makeover that causes her to question who she wants to become. At just 22 years old, she's surrounded by men who see her prodigious talent as their ticket to self-fulfillment. Not least of these is Professor Orenthal Hobson, a local music teacher who strikes up a bet with a colleague requiring him